Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. I know how precious your time is, and I know that many of you may have had a difficult night last night. So the fact that you are here on a weekend, investing your time in learning more about your child, tells me something important. It tells me that you care deeply. And I want to start by saying this. You are doing a better job than you think. Before we begin, I'd like you to do something for me. It's a visualization, so I'd like you to picture a child. Maybe it's your son, maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's your grandchild, maybe it's a child that you care for. Picture their face, their smile. Picture their strengths, their quirks, the things that make them special. Keep that child in your mind throughout today's talk because that child is why we're here. Not because they are naughty, not because they are difficult, not because they won't sleep, but because they are loved and because we want them to thrive. Now, just out of interest, who pictured a child who struggles with sleep? And who pictured a child who doesn't always realise just how loved they are? That is why today's conversation matters. Now, I'd like you to think about something else. Think back to the last time you had a really good night's sleep. Not an okay night's sleep, a really good night's sleep. You slept well. You woke refreshed. You felt rested. How did you feel the next day? More patient? More optimistic? More resilient? More like yourself? Now think about the opposite. Think about the last truly dreadful night's sleep you had. The kind where you lay awake worrying, or perhaps you were woken repeatedly throughout the night. How did you feel then? Less patient? More emotional? More irritable? More overwhelmed? Think now, who found themselves becoming less patient? Who found themselves snapping at people they love? And yet, when children are exhausted, we often expect them to regulate beautifully. We expect them to concentrate, to manage disappointment, to cope with change, to learn, to sit still, and to be flexible. That's a very big ask for a tired brain. Now, how many people have Googled sleep advice after midnight? How many people have Googled at 2 o'clock in the morning while sitting on the edge of your child's bed? You're my people. How many people have ever thought, if my child would just sleep, everything else would feel easier? You're not alone. Thousands of families feel exactly like this. Oh, and I should probably say who I am for those of you who don't know me. My name is Dr. Harry Woodward. I'm a consultant paediatrician, and I talk about this thing every day. Over the years, I have met thousands of families, and sleep is one of the commonest reasons families tell me that life feels difficult. I remember one parent saying to me, "Doctor, I feel awful saying this out loud, but I dread bedtime." Not because they didn't love their child, quite the opposite. Bedtime had become 2 hours of negotiation, tears, frustration, exhaustion, night after night. And then they said something that has stayed with me ever since. They said, "I don't recognize the person I've become." Sleep deprivation changes families. It changes children. It changes parents. It changes relationships. But, and this is the really important message, there is hope. I have to say that becoming a parent has made me a far more compassionate doctor. Before I had children, I understood sleep difficulties intellectually. After becoming a parent, I understood them emotionally. And those are two very different things. Parenting is humbling, wonderfully humbling. Knowledge helps, but it doesn't make us immune from the challenges. So my hope today is not that you leave with a perfect sleep plan. My hope is that you leave with something much more important. Understanding, confidence, hope. Because exhausted families do not need judgment. They need understanding, they need support, and they need hope. And that is what today's talk is all about. So let's start with a really important question. Why does sleep matter so much? Because if you've ever spoken to somebody about sleep, you've probably been given lots of advice. Try a routine, take the screens away, move bedtime earlier. Have you tried lavender spray? Whilst all of those things may have their place, I think sometimes we miss the bigger picture. Sleep isn't simply about being less tired. Sleep affects almost every aspect of a child's life. It affects attention. It affects learning. It affects emotions. It affects behavior. It affects anxiety. It affects physical health. And it affects family life. I sometimes think of sleep as being like the foundations of a house. If the foundations are strong, the house can usually withstand the occasional storm. But if the foundations are shaky, cracks appear everywhere. Attention, learning, behavior, emotional regulation, relationships at home, parent well-being, everything becomes harder. I'm just thinking, who here is more patient when they're sleep deprived? Not many of us. And yet, when children are tired, we often expect them to do exactly that. I sometimes say to parents that sleep deprivation is a little bit like trying to get through the day with your mobile phone battery permanently stuck at 10%. You can still function, you can still send messages, and you can still make calls, but everything takes more effort. You're slower, you're more frustrated. Many of our children are navigating school, friendships, and family life with their emotional battery permanently stuck at 10%. And that's before we even think about ADHD or autism. Now, I suspect many of you will recognise what I'm about to describe. After a particularly poor night's sleep, the next day looks very different. More meltdowns, more tears, more arguments, more anxiety, more overwhelm. You're not imagining it. Sleep and behaviour are intimately connected. I remember meeting one family who came to see me because they were worried about behaviour. Their son was having frequent meltdowns. School were concerned about concentration. Relationships at home were becoming strained. Everyone was focused on behaviour, so I asked a simple question. Tell me, about sleep. The parents looked at each other and laughed, not because it was funny, but because they hadn't had a proper night's sleep in years. Their son was taking hours to fall asleep. He was waking repeatedly during the night, and by morning, everybody was exhausted. When you're exhausted, everything becomes harder. So rather than focusing only on behaviour, we focused on sleep. We looked at routines, anxiety, sensory differences, the bedroom environment. There wasn't one magic solution. There were lots of small changes applied consistently. And gradually, something changed. The child didn't become someone different. He became more like himself. And one day, his parents said something I'll never forget. It feels like we've got our son back. That sentence has stayed with me ever since. Because that's the power of sleep. Sleep won't solve everything, but for many families it is the first domino. And when that domino falls, confidence begins to grow. So if sleep is so important, why is it so difficult? Well, I think the answer is this. Sleep isn't one thing. Sleep is actually many things, and that brings us to the sleep confidence wheel. So let's start with the very first spoke on the sleep confidence wheel, understanding sleep. Because before we can improve sleep, we first need to understand how sleep works. I want to reassure you straight away, children are not bad sleepers. Children experience barriers to sleep. And if we can understand those barriers, we can often begin to make meaningful improvements. Please think about this for a minute. How many people here have ever looked at your child at 10 o'clock at night and thought, how on earth are you still awake? I remember meeting one family who said, Doctor, he just never seems tired. He could be awake all day, busy all evening, and then at 10 o'clock still bouncing around the house. His parents started to wonder whether they were somehow doing something wrong, but this wasn't bad parenting. This was a child with ADHD, whose body clock simply worked differently. Understanding that changed everything. The parents stopped blaming themselves and started working with their child's biology rather than against it. I find it helpful to think about sleep as being influenced by two systems. The first is something called sleep pressure. Sleep pressure is exactly what it sounds like. From the moment we wake up in the morning, our brains gradually build up pressure to sleep. The longer we're awake, the greater the pressure becomes. Most of us recognize this feeling: heavy eyelids, yawning, finding it harder to concentrate. That's sleep pressure at work. The second system is our body clock, sometimes called our circadian rhythm. This is our brain's internal clock. It tells us when to feel awake and when to feel sleepy. And one of the most important signals for this body clock is light. Bright light in the morning tells the brain it's time to wake up. Darkness in the evening tells the brain it's time to prepare for sleep. As darkness falls, the brain starts producing a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin is often misunderstood. Melatonin does not make children fall asleep. It is not a sleeping tablet. Instead, melatonin acts acts more like a messenger. It tells the brain, nighttime has arrived. It is time to prepare for sleep. Now, here's where things become interesting. Children with ADHD and autism often experience these systems differently. Some children simply do not build sleep pressure in the same way. Some children have body clocks that run later. Some children seem wide awake at 10 o'clock at night and then struggle to wake in the morning. Parents often tell me, "Doctor, he just doesn't seem tired," or "she's bouncing off the walls at bedtime." And I think this can be incredibly frustrating because parents often assume that if their child isn't falling asleep, they must be doing something wrong. But often that's not true. Sometimes the child's brain is simply working differently. Understanding that changes everything, because once we understand how sleep works, we stop asking, "What's wrong with my child?" and we start asking, "What barriers might my child be facing?" And that is a much kinder question. So, if I could leave you with just one message from this section, it would be this. Children are not bad sleepers. Children experience barriers to sleep, and when we understand those barriers, we begin to respond differently, with curiosity, with compassion, and with hope. Which brings us to the second spoke on the sleep confidence wheel: healthy sleep habits. So let's move on to healthy sleep habits. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Here we go. Another person telling me I have to have a bedtime routine. And I completely understand that reaction, because good sleep doesn't begin at bedtime. Good sleep actually begins the moment your child wakes up in the morning. Now think about this. How many people here have some sort of bedtime routine? Now, how many here think it works exactly as planned every single night? I thought so, because life happens. Children get overtired. After school clubs run late. Somebody remembers homework at 8 o'clock. Somebody can't find their pajamas. I have to confess something. As a paediatrician, you might imagine that our bedtime routine at home is always calm, beautifully structured, and perfectly predictable. It isn't. Parenting is one of the most humbling experiences of my life. It constantly reminds me that there is a very big difference between knowing what to do and actually doing it when real life gets in the way. Parenting has made me a better doctor. Medicine has made me a better parent, but neither has made me perfect. So please don't leave today feeling that you need to create the perfect bedtime routine. Aim for consistency, not perfection. I often tell families to think about bedtime like landing an aeroplane. Aeroplanes don't simply switch their engines off at 35,000 feet and drop out of the sky. They descend gradually. The lights dim. The speed slows. The cabin becomes quieter. The whole system prepares for landing. Children's brains are very similar. Many of our children spend the entire day in a state of high stimulation. We can't expect them to go from 100 miles an hour to fully asleep in 5 minutes. The brain needs time to slow down. And this is where a predictable wind-down routine can be incredibly helpful. Not because routines magically make children sleep, but because routines send the brain an important message. The day is ending. Sleep is coming. The exact routine matters less than the predictability. Children often sleep better when the same things happen in the same order at roughly the same time, because predictability reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty can be very activating for anxious and neurodivergent brains. One of the most important and often overlooked parts of healthy sleep habits is actually the morning. Getting up at roughly the same time each morning helps set the body's internal clock. Morning light is particularly important. Exposure to bright light shortly after waking tells the brain, "Good morning, it's time to be awake." And that helps the brain know when to feel sleepy later that evening. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to wake up at exactly the same time 7 days a week. But if children sleep in for several extra hours every weekend, it can be a little bit like travelling across time zones twice every week. Many parents describe this as, "He's up until midnight on Sunday and impossible to wake on Monday morning." And sometimes that's exactly what's happening. The body clock has shifted. So if I could leave you with just 3 practical messages from this section. Number 1, aim for consistency, not perfection. Number 2, create a predictable wind-down routine that works for your family. And number 3, remember that healthy sleep starts in the morning, not at bedtime. Because routines don't guarantee sleep. They simply make sleep more likely. And speaking of things that can either support sleep or completely derail it, let's move on to our next spoke, screens and technology. Before I say anything else, I'd like to start with a quick show of hands. How many people here have ever had an argument about turning off a screen? Excellent. I was beginning to worry it was just in my house. How many people have ever thought, "That's it, I'm banning screens forever"? And how long did that last? Screens are not the enemy. In fact, for many children, screens do a lot of very positive things. They provide enjoyment. They provide connection, relaxation, predictability, achievement, friendship. Some children tell me, "That's where my friends are." Others, "That's the one thing I'm really good at." And for many neurodivergent children, screens provide something else, recovery, because school can be exhausting. Social interactions can be exhausting. Masking can be exhausting. And for some children, coming home and gaming is the equivalent of an adult sitting down with a cup of tea after a difficult day. So rather than asking, how do I get my children off screens? I think a much better question is, what is this screen doing for my child? Because once we understand the need, we are much more likely to find a helpful solution. Now, having said all of that, screens absolutely can affect sleep, and they do so in several ways. Firstly, screens are stimulating. Gaming, particularly competitive gaming, increases arousal, and activated brains do not sleep easily. Secondly, many children struggle with transitions. Moving from something highly rewarding, highly stimulating, and highly predictable straight into bed can be incredibly difficult. Thirdly, bright screens late in the evening can delay the release of melatonin and shift the body clock later. Now, this doesn't mean every family needs exactly the same rules. Number 1, avoid highly stimulating activities immediately before bed. Number 2, build a transition period between screens and sleep. Remember the aeroplane landing. We need a descent, not an emergency landing. Number 3, create family agreements rather than constant battles, because rules work best when children understand them. The exact rule matters less than the consistency. So if I could leave you with one message from this section, it would be this: screens are rarely just about screens. And for many children, the bigger issue is actually anxiety and worry, which brings us neatly to our next spoke, anxiety and worry. So let's move on to the fourth spoke on the sleep confidence wheel, anxiety and worry. Nighttime is when the world goes quiet and worries become loud. During the day, children are busy: school, play, screens, life. At bedtime, the distractions disappear, and what fills that space? Often worries. Some families describe bedtime as death by 1,000 questions. What are we doing tomorrow? Will Grandma be okay? What if I can't get to sleep? What if nobody plays with me at school? Every night, another question, another conversation, another worry. I remember one little girl who asked for water 14 times at bedtime. The bedtime behaviour wasn't the worry. The bedtime behaviour was not the problem. The worry was. She was frightened about school, friendships, getting things wrong. Anxious children rarely need more pressure. They need understanding. So, a practical strategy is something called worry time. Earlier in the evening, not at bedtime, set aside 10 minutes specifically for worries. What is your brain worrying about tonight? Write about them. Write them down. Talk about them. Some families find that writing down worries helps the brain let go of them. Don't come to bed. You've already been written down. This gives worries a time and a place earlier in the evening so they don't hijack bedtime. And always remember, they are not trying to make life difficult. They are having a difficult time. Which brings us to the next spoke, ADHD and autism differences. Let's move on to the fifth spoke on the sleep confidence wheel, ADHD and autism differences. If traditional sleep advice hasn't worked for your child, it does not mean that you're doing anything wrong. Sometimes it simply means that your child's brain works differently, and that requires a different approach. Many children with ADHD have a delayed sleep phase. He's bouncing off the walls at bedtime. She's finally sleepy at 10 o'clock. He's exhausted all day, then suddenly comes alive at night. This is not willfulness. This is neurology. The body clock simply runs later, and working with that, rather than against it, makes all the difference. Their body may be in bed. Their mind is still running, thinking, planning, imagining, remembering, worrying. The ADHD brain doesn't have an off switch, and we can't simply demand that it stops. Autism brings its own set of challenges: sensory differences, predictability, interoception, the label in pyjamas, the texture of bedding, a ticking clock, a smell, a sound in the street. Any of these things can be the difference between a child who settles and a child who simply cannot. I remember one family where sleep was fine at home. Every family holiday was a disaster. New bedroom, different smells, different sounds, different routine. Once they understood how important predictability was, everything changed. They brought familiar things with them: the same pillow, a white noise machine, a familiar routine wherever they were. Holidays became possible again. So the key message would be: neurodivergent children are not simply typical children who need stricter routines. They need more predictability, more sensory support, more flexibility, and sometimes additional help. Which brings us to our next spoke: environment and routine. So let's move on to the sixth spoke on the sleep confidence wheel: environment and routine. Because children don't sleep in a vacuum, they sleep in an environment, and sometimes relatively small changes in that environment can make a surprisingly big difference. I'd like you to do a little thought experiment with me. Imagine that I came to your house tonight and walked into your child's bedroom. What would I find? Would I find a room that is dark, quiet, cool, predictable, calming? Or would I find a room full of stimulation, bright lights, screens, noise, clutter, exciting toys? We're aiming for good enough, not perfection. Let's start with light. Remember what we said earlier. Light tells the brain, stay awake. Darkness tells the brain, prepare for sleep. Some children are extremely sensitive to light. Street lights, hallway lights, alarm clocks, even tiny LEDs from chargers. For some children, blackout curtains can make a significant difference. For others, they make no difference at all. This is where becoming a detective is so important. Now, let's think about noise. Some children can sleep through absolutely anything. Others wake if somebody breathes too loudly in the next room. Many families find that white noise can be helpful. Fans, white noise machines, rain sounds. There is no single right answer. It's about understanding your child. And then we come to sensory differences. This is especially important for many autistic children. Think about pyjamas, bedding, textures, seams, labels, body position. Some children sleep better under heavy blankets. Others find them intolerable. I remember one child who simply could not sleep. The family had tried everything. Eventually they realised that he could hear sounds that nobody else in the house had even noticed. Once he started wearing ear defenders and later used white noise, his sleep improved dramatically. Children are wonderfully different. Our job isn't to create the perfect bedroom. Our job is to create the right bedroom for our child. Children borrow predictability from adults. The more predictable we can make bedtime, the safer many children feel. Please don't aim for perfection. Aim for patterns. Aim for consistency. Aim for good enough most of the time, because sleep is not built through one perfect bedtime. Sleep is built through hundreds of ordinary evenings repeated over time. Which brings us to our next spoke, sleep disorders. Let's move on to the 7th spoke on the sleep confidence wheel, sleep disorders. Most sleep difficulties are not caused by serious medical problems. However, sometimes poor sleep is a symptom of something that deserves proper attention, and I think it's important to know what to look out for. So, sleep disorder number 1 is sleep apnea. He snores like an adult. She's incredibly restless, but still wakes exhausted. Heavy sweating during sleep, unusual sleep positions, gasping or choking. Now, not every snorer has sleep apnea, but if breathing sounds laboured during sleep, it's worth asking the question. Sleep disorder number 2, restless leg syndrome. My legs won't stay still. I can't get comfortable. She's constantly moving in bed. He kicks all night long. This can be associated with low iron levels, and it is often underdiagnosed in children, and a simple blood test can be very illuminating. And sleep disorder 3, parasomnias. So sleepwalking, night terrors, confusional arousals, sleep talking. Most parasomnias are harmless and children usually grow out of them. They can be frightening to witness, but the most important thing to know, children are rarely aware of what is happening and they rarely remember it in the morning. I remember a family who came worried about behaviour. I asked about sleep. Oh yes, he snores, but we never thought much about it. He was irritable, emotional, struggling at school. Turned out that he had significant sleep apnea. Once that was treated, behaviour, concentration and mood all improved significantly. So when to seek further advice? If your child snores regularly, if they appear to stop breathing during sleep, if they are extremely restless at night, they seem unusually sleepy during the day, despite adequate time in bed, or if they're having frequent nightmares, night terrors or sleepwalking. Any of these warrant a conversation with your GP or paediatrician. Sometimes poor sleep isn't about parenting behaviours or routines. Sometimes it is medical, and recognising that can be life-changing. Which brings us to the final spoke on the sleep confidence wheel. Additional supports and medication. So let's move on to the final spoke on the sleep confidence wheel, additional supports and medication. And I think this may be one of the most important sections of today's talk, because I know there will be some parents sitting in this room thinking, we've tried everything. You've done the routines, you've addressed anxiety, you've adjusted the environment, you've worked on screens, and yet your child is still struggling. If that's you, I want to say something very clearly. You have not failed. Now, how many people here have ever felt guilty about even thinking about medication for sleep? And if that's you, Thank you for your honesty, because I think many parents carry enormous guilt about sleep. They think, if I was stricter, if I was more consistent, if I was a better parent, my child wouldn't need this. But sleep is biological. Some children need additional support, and that is absolutely okay. Some parents think, if I was a better parent, my child wouldn't need this. But recognizing when additional support is needed is often one of the most important things a parent can do. Think of it like this. I often compare this to eyesight. If a child cannot see the board at school, we don't tell parents to try harder. We don't blame the child. We don't insist that everybody else can see, so they should too. We recognize that the child needs support. Perhaps they need glasses. Sleep can be very similar. For some children, routines and environmental changes are enough. For others, they are not. The commonest medication used to support sleep in neurodivergent children is melatonin. And melatonin is often misunderstood. It is not a sleeping tablet that switches children off. Remember what we discussed earlier. Melatonin is a hormone that helps tell the brain nighttime has arrived, prepare for sleep. For some children, particularly those with ADHD and autism, this can be incredibly helpful. But melatonin is not magic. It does not replace good sleep habits. I think of melatonin as another spoke on the wheel, another tool, another accommodation. Needing help is not failure. Using support is not failure. Accepting that your child needs something different is not failure. I remember a little boy called Leslie. Leslie has autism and is non-speaking. His family were exhausted. He was waking repeatedly during the night. Everybody in the house was tired. Parents, siblings, the whole family exhausted. The family were already doing so many things well. They had routines. They had consistency. They understood his sensory needs. They had worked incredibly hard, and yet everybody was still exhausted. We introduced melatonin, not because anybody had failed, but because Leslie needed another layer of support. Sleep was not suddenly perfect, but it was better. And sometimes better is life-changing, because when children sleep better, parents sleep better. When parents sleep better, families function better. And when families function better, confidence grows. When sleep improves, confidence grows. One of the most important lessons I have learned, both as a doctor and as a parent, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. So, if you're sitting here today feeling exhausted, please hear this. You do not have to do this alone. Support exists, hope exists, and things can improve. Which brings us to the end of our journey around the sleep confidence wheel. So, as we come towards the end of our time together today, I'd like you to look back at the sleep confidence wheel one last time. At first glance, it can feel overwhelming. 8 spokes, 8 areas to think about, 8 possible reasons why sleep might be difficult. But I don't want you to leave today thinking that you need to fix all 8. You don't. In fact, I'd strongly encourage you not to try. Instead, I'd like you to think about the child you pictured at the beginning. Picture that child again. Picture their face. Picture their smile, their personality, the things that make them uniquely them. Now I'd like you to look back at the wheel, and without overthinking it, point to the spoke that feels most relevant to your family right now. keep your finger there. That's your starting point. Not 8 spokes, 1. Just 1. Because confidence is not built by trying to do everything. Confidence is built one small step at a time. Confidence is built by taking one small step, one calmer bedtime, one new routine, one conversation, one less argument, one extra hour of sleep. That's how families move from exhaustion to confidence, not in one giant leap, but one spoke at a time. Now, before you leave today, I'd like to ask one small favour. Please take out your phone and scan the QR code on the screen. It will take less than a minute. When you scan the code, you'll be asked which spoke on the confidence wheel feels most relevant to your family right now. Choose the one that feels most important, because every family is different and the support you need should reflect that. Once you've completed the form, you will receive my Sleep Confidence Starter Pack. Inside you'll find the Sleep Confidence Wheel, a bedtime routine planner, a sleep diary, a bedroom environment checklist, practical sleep strategies matched to your chosen spoke, and guidance on when to seek further help. There is no obligation, no pressure, just support. And by telling me what your family needs, you'll also help shape the future resources that I create, because I want to create resources based on the challenges real families are facing, not the challenges I imagine they have. I would genuinely love to continue this conversation. If you forget everything I've said today except one thing, I hope it's this. Children are not bad sleepers. Children experience barriers to sleep, and when we understand those barriers, we begin to respond differently, with curiosity, with compassion, and with hope. Your child does not need a perfect parent. They need somebody who keeps showing up, somebody who keeps learning, somebody who keeps trying, somebody who continues to believe that things can improve even after difficult nights. Now, please remember, considering who is in this room today, I have absolutely no doubt that those people already exist because they're sitting right here. So please be kind to yourselves. Celebrate the small wins. Aim for progress, not perfection. And remember, sleep won't solve everything, but for many families it is the first domino. And when sleep improves, confidence grows, one spoke at a time. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to spend this time with you, and I wish you and your family every success on your journey from chaos to confidence.